this year there was 6 darkrooms, and they are all different themes. So he's like...
Themed. I remember last year reading the Cuddle Fuck Shack.
Yeah.
And I was like...
That was my favourite.
That sounds like... that's how I want to describe my sexuality. Cuddle Fuck Shack.
Great. Welcome to Behind Closed Doors, the official Sydney Sauna podcast hosted by yours truly, Paisley Heart. This podcast is your cheeky and candid space for unfiltered queer voices and tantalizing stories. So come with me. Welcome to episode 5 of the official podcast of Sydney Sauna, Behind Closed Doors. Today I am with boy, girl, artist, advocate. Courtney Act is more than just gender or drag. She is a contemporary artist who embodies the zeitgeist of an era. Ooh. She's a world-touring singer, performer, and reality TV star. Courtney has taken over TV screens as a wildcard icon on Australian Idol, RuPaul's Drag Race finalist, the American season, UK Celebrity Big Brother winner.
Yes.
And runner-up on Dancing with the Stars.
Yes. Twice
runner-up.
Twice runner-up.
Oh, I wanted to just do like a cheeky, it'd be shorter if we did a list of things that you haven't achieved, because you've done a lot. You've done a lot. Well, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. How fun to be here in Sydney Sauna and to be sober. I see locker 46 over there, just past the camera, and it brings back a flood of memories.
What's behind that closed door?
Well, it's a closed door, but I'll just say hello to Kim and the other people that I was sharing that locker with that night.
So I feel like as we were coming in, you're like, I think we should just go straight in. If you have a first-time story at Sydney Sauna.
So I know Sydney Sauna has been open for a long time and then like maybe went through a facelift.
Mm-hmm.
And
happens to the best of us.
I mean, hopefully.
To be announced.
Yeah.
To be confirmed.
During lockdown, I was living overseas and then I came back. I was in hotel quarantine for 2 weeks, as some of us will remember. In Australia, we got locked in a little hotel room. I did aerobics whilst I was in there and wore lots of Lycra and posted on my Instagram and made it a good time.
We needed some energy flow towards us in the quarantine.
Yeah. And I remember like there was 0 cases of COVID in Australia. That's an important part of this story. And that like...
Okay, I'm seeing somewhere into the future right now.
There was something where like everything was shut, but the sauna was still open. Like there was some like health club, like maybe gyms were open and the sauna was open. So like Sydney Sauna was kind of like heaving with queer and gay men, but like the bars were shut. And I just remember hearing about it from overseas and I just imagine this renaissance of like queer sex positivity happening in the walls of Sydney Sauna.
Great.
And I thought how exciting and how like liberating for the Sydney gay scene in particular, who have historically maybe been parts of it have been like a little closed off to like sex positivity. Whereas like in Europe, sex and queerness is, I think, a lot more free-flowing.
Mutually exclusive. They are one and the same.
Yeah. So I kind of liked that idea. And this was by coincidence, not by design. But I got out of hotel quarantine. My friend Phoenix, I can't quite remember what had happened, but we went to something at the Opera House. So the Opera House was open. Like we were allowed to go see events. Like it wasn't like... Anyway, I'm now prefacing too much and making it sound like I was doing...
Give us the hard truth.
Well, we got to Oxford Street and we like just thought like, let's do a walk up Oxford Street and see what's open. And I was like, oh, Sydney Sauna's like having this renaissance because everything's closed and like gay men are coming and discovering it. And we came up, I think it was like 9:30 p.m. And we came up and we paid our cover and we walked in and the place was empty. And the person at the door was like, oh, come back. I can't remember what they said, like midnight or later sort of thing. And we were like, okay, what should we do? And so we walked downstairs. we went across the road to Claire's Kitchen. Hello to Claire de Lune, which is like a French bistro. And we sat down and they had like a full 3-course French dinner with cocktails and like appetizers and desserts. And Claire is very generous and a friend of 24 years and just kept bringing food. We just like walked out of there like stuffed with food.
Right, feeling sexy, feeling hot, feeling ready.
And still had our Sydney Sauna stamp on. And I'm like, all right, well, it's midnight now. Let's go back to Sydney Sauna. And we came in and it was just so full of food, which is not how you want to come. You want to get stuffed at the sauna, not before.
Yeah.
And so like came up Sydney Sauna and I was like this locker room was like so social. People were like chatting and like getting changed, and it felt kind of I don't know, it felt exciting and kind of fun, and like the hot tub was sort of like a vibe and it was sexy but social and didn't feel like it didn't feel shameful or seedy. Like I think I have experienced like gay men Sydney sexuality can feel.
Yep.
And I'm careful to delineate there. And I thought, oh, this is lovely. And so, yeah, we had some fun that night. And it was just a funny, like, out of 2 weeks of hotel quarantine, back to Australia, mid-COVID, and, like, popped along to Sydney Sauna for a little...
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was open. I didn't know it was open.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, it's so necessary, and like, just to hear that it was so social. And it's, like you're saying, like, sometimes sex, especially in the more, like, straight, white, cis, gay, Oxford Street world, though there's so much beauty, sometimes it can be a bit hard and fast and just exchange, no social, no connection. Yeah, I should have been here.
Yeah, it was cute. It was just that thing where, like, I think sometimes in gay bars, it's interesting, right? Because I often differentiate between like gay and queer.
Yes, me too.
For me, gay represents a more homogenous group of gay, usually white, often like similar socioeconomic background, similar body type, which is usually fit, muscular. Sometimes can feel a little like gatekeepy or exclusionary if you don't fit into that mold. And queer being something that's more inclusive, often diverse of gender, body shape, skin color, age, socioeconomic background, and so on. In Sydney, I guess, and not in a shameful or like finger pointy way, but I guess like the Beresford on Sundays kind of typifies a gay male bar.
I feel like there's like a time and place for everything, which is so amazing about queerness, and that kind of gay is like a section of queerness is what I believe. So it's like there's a time and place for the Beresford, there's a time and place for Sydney Sauna, there's a time and place to go to the protests. Totally. Like, that's one of my favorite things. I had, that was like one of my most like feared things coming here the very first time of like, is my body shape, my expression, my like way I'm going to show up in here going to be of value to anyone, or am I going to be like ashamed and hiding? But yeah, it's so beautiful when you come in and have those experiences of it being more on the social side, so you can humanize your experience. But again, I love dark rooms as well, where it's just like, we're in, I don't know your name, I know I like your body, I know I like what this touch is doing to me, and I give peace. That was great. That was like a good mutual exchange of energy. And
it's funny you mentioned dark rooms, because I have this like theory that I've been thinking about. I haven't acted on. I've been in a dark room, but I've never given over to a dark room. Like I've gone into a dark room with somebody that I knew, or I've like at Burning Man, been in like the orgy dome at Comfort and Joy, which is very dark, and sort of like been with friends trying to be like non-disturbing observers, like 2012, I think, like younger, sort of like like kind of those people that you do not want in that space, basically. But I have been that person where you're sort of like,
look what's happening over there. Oh my God.
And you can just hear that like two old ladies eating soup is like the sound. You're like
echoing through the place.
Yeah, but like 100 old ladies eating soup. I have this like thought, right, where we have so many value judgments that we create based on how someone looks. And we talk about attraction, I think, primarily through a visual stimulus. Like you see someone, you think they're attractive. That's usually the first attractor. Then obviously, I think, I don't know, for me, like personality and that sort of connection is more important than that. But like often the first thing is how someone looks. Often in like a social, sexual situation, there's maybe not necessarily, but not always as much personality into it in like a cruising or anonymous sex sort of situation. There's still like a dynamic of somebody's vibe and energy.
Of course, yeah. If you're not into being fully dominated, then you're going to go, okay, even though you're hot, this isn't right for, or vice versa.
Totally.
If you don't want someone that's too surrendered, then you're like, oh,
yeah,
that's not me. There's not a match that is outside of the physical.
But then I was thinking about this idea of like dark rooms where you kind of, you literally remove vision. Like if it's a dark room.
There's a dark room here that I've never been into. I'm too scared.
Right. So where it's like pitch black and you actually are then left with 4 senses. And what does that mean with regards to sex and sexuality and feeling? And I've talked to friends about it and like people are like, no, you don't know who the person is. I'm like, yeah, I think that's the point. I'm not saying that I necessarily want to go into a dark room and give myself over to the darkness and just go off touch, smell, taste, and hearing. But there's something very interesting to me about removing the value judgment of appearance and what happens when you judge based on how touch feels. Again, in my mind, without having actually done it, I imagine that like it's about like how someone feels, like how do they touch me, how do I receive their touch. I guess like what does their body feel like is a way that you again can like slip in a value judgment about like body type, where you're like, oh, this person's soft, or this person's hard, or this person's strong, or this person's fat, or this person's tall, or this person's like, you can tell different things from touch. But I don't know, I'm kind of like, for some reason, I'm fascinated by like the value judgments we make about how people look and how it relates to sexual attraction. And maybe it's just innate because the whole point of like biological like sexual reproduction is to like make babies and to like further the species. So maybe it's about like being able to visually recognize what traits are going to continue this species forward.
So my experience is, I've never been in a dark room. It is something I do want to do at some point. And like in the outside world, I identify as demisexual. Like to be open to have sex with someone, I have to be like feel emotionally safe. But context is so good for me. Like in a dark room or in a sauna, I know there's like an unsaid agreement. So I can come in here and fully embrace my slutty open self. Mostly to a degree of a side. I still need a bit of emotional safety to go full penetration. But this physical thing, there is like new layers that open up to me as well, is like my experience of, for instance, how you're like, I'm the giggly girl in the dark room. So the first time in a dark room was last year. I went over to Europe, mostly in Berlin for 3 months. And I went into my first dark room. I'd been to many, many saunas, but not dark rooms. And I was essentially that person, like just sort of...
Dark room at a club?
At a club, yeah. And I sat there, and usually to like feel safe within myself at these places, I'm pretty scared of like cruising someone. So I will take up my own space and start connecting with myself and I guess like being the radiant flower and let people come to me. And in here, again, like I feel safe in a like I'll let anyone touch me as long as they're nice. Like, no matter how attracted I am to them. You know, sometimes there's, especially like older men in here that maybe don't get to touch youthful bodies anymore and get a lot of judgment, especially in the outside world. But even in here, so I'm like, touch me, go. Like, enjoy yourself. But I get really fierce if they like get angry at me for not touching them back. Like, if they expect something, if they like start to grab my head, I'm like, no, I didn't consent to that. Go for it. And that's like, it's fascinating that I'll let anyone touch me when I can see them. But that idea of the dark is like, I'm just scared of being taken advantage of when I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's the not knowing what it is that fascinates me for some reason. And I can't work out like the best way to articulate it, because it's not even, because most people are like, oh, well, maybe if you like curated a dark room and you like, I guess, knew all the people who were in there, and I'm like, no, that kind of goes against the point.
Against it.
I mean, maybe it's a stepping stone.
It is.
It's also like, it's not like high on my priorities list. It's not like giving myself over to the darkness. It sounds it's not like, it's not something that I necessarily want to do. It's more like an intellectual concept of understanding that I'm kind of fascinated by. I guess maybe as someone who does drag and has a certain kind of man, when I'm dressed one way, a certain kind of man like who wants to fuck me, and when I'm dressed a different kind of way, that exact same man wants to like fight me. And I always find that interesting. I'm like, I'm literally the same person. But just with like a bit of makeup, a wig, some
just a slight allusion to the difference.
Yeah, and it's like, I get it, because I see that like in drag I present very femininely, and out of drag, like I'm I mean lesbian at best, but generally sort of like male presenting. And so I get, in a way, like I've definitely had experiences where there was what year was it? It was 2014, and there was this twink who was like quite, not negative aggressively, but like quite like assertively expressing their attraction toward me. And
like a mean girl coming after you.
No, just like some like cute little twink being like, hey, like,
okay, got you.
Like,
got you.
And I was like, there was something, I was like, oh, that's not in a maybe a patronizing way. I was like, oh, that's cute. And I kind of found them attractive, but also like I guess I would have been 32. They would have been like early 20s. And I wasn't like, I was kind of like in a work mode and just a bit like, oh, sort of, thank you.
Okay, so you were Courtney in this moment.
I was Courtney.
Yeah.
Yes, I was. And they were sort of like flirting, and I was like, this is interesting. There was a kind of interesting energy. Long story short, this twink who I assumed to be cis was a trans man. And it was interesting because it was maybe like 2014. It was kind of like maybe the first time where I had an experience of like assumed gender versus reality, and it was like it was just an interesting, like, I've always thought like gender is one of the first most basic assumptions you make about a person whenever you see them. And I know that like a lot of straight identifying men will sometimes assume my gender to be female and then be like, oh, well, that's a bloke, kind of thing.
Spiral out of control.
Yeah, and it was just an interesting thing in my mind to assume someone was cis and then learn that they were trans, and like just sort of like for the first time as the younger person sort of understanding what that meant, and then understanding, like I sort of like, I think perhaps where like my mind might differ from like straight blokes, or maybe not, depends on the straight bloke, because I know a lot of them do play it through and they're like,
let's do it.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, no.
I was sort of like, oh, that's interesting. It's sort of like interesting information about that person's body that I hadn't considered. Like, am I still attracted to that person? Yes. and sort of like playing it through in that sort of way. But just sort of like that interesting, maybe like a similar experience of different understanding that like maybe straight blokes feel when looking at me and then find out that I'm not a cis woman or a woman at all.
It's one of my favorite experiences being in queer spaces. Like now it is definitely, the bridge has gotten a lot shorter, but like originally coming into queer spaces been like, boy, girl, boy, it doesn't matter. I actually am way more attracted when I don't know, you know, like that like, because I just love gender fuckery. I love like breaking the binaries. And I think to like continue riffing on this piece of you, and like a bit of my queer journey of, and this will age us out a little bit. During COVID, I only learnt that Courtney Act wasn't a woman. I remember like watching Australian Idol quite young and being like, oh, like, cool, that woman's doing great. She's very silly. And then like times maybe like your music had come up on like Triple J or something like that and been like, oh, Courtney Act, it's that chick from Australian Idol. And then I got introduced to Drag Race during COVID. And I was like,
hang on,
hey. But in that, you know, when I think about it a little bit more, I think it also had something to do with like queer representation and like me blocking out things. Because of like, I also do remember you coming as Shane and like that whole storyline, but just something just shut it out. I couldn't conceptualize. I grew up not in a city. So I think like I'd never met a drag queen till like 2019. And just like that concept was just undoable. And I was thinking about it as we're coming into this podcast, even like, I vaguely remember this as well do you remember there was like maybe essentially like a drag king on Australian Big Brother, maybe season 2? There was that person that came in as 2 different people and they would go in and out and they had this like drag king persona essentially. Do you remember this?
No, I don't remember this.
There was a drag king essentially on one of the seasons of Big Brother.
On the first season of Celebrity Big Brother, Vanessa Wagner, who's a drag queen, was on. And there was a season, it was an early season. I don't think, it could have been the first season of Big Brother. It was after I was on Idol, a trans woman named Miriam. Do you remember the TV show There's Something About Miriam?
Yes.
Which is a great podcast
Again,
about.
Only now going true.
Yeah.
True. Just something blocked it out for me.
Yeah. I mean, the TV show premise, it's funny because at the time, the premise was Miriam is a trans woman who was sort of high passing, in air quotes. And she was in a house. It was like a bachelorette thing. And there was a whole bunch of blokes who were like vying to date her. And the secret they didn't know. And I think as it presented, it was like, Miriam used to be a man. And sort of at the time,
that probably was progressive.
it was so progressive. Like, I mean, I wasn't working in an activist space or anything, but I was like, wow, how amazing to see a trans woman, a beautiful trans woman on television, not also realizing the negative tropes of like deception and disclosure that were like laced into this idea. And the podcast sort of goes into amazing detail about the reaction of these men, and they like trashed the house and like there was court cases and all of this stuff. But in the interim, Miriam came to Australia and they like sent her into the Big Brother house as an intruder.
I'm remembering this.
Gone off track, but it was interesting, like that. Like I don't know, like people were like inquisitive, and there wasn't like the hysteria, the moral panic surrounding stuff like there is now. But you were talking about a drag king persona who was
I can't remember the name, but they had like a bit of a derelict look. Like it was very semi-homeless as a woman, beanie, bit of like fucked up makeup. But yeah, I don't know, like that just came through as I was thinking like into this. I think another thing I'd love to go into is like again, I've seen you in the media growing up, and like would consider you a bit of a media darling, like so polished and so kind, like, and radiating love and like silliness, and you're like also quite political, but such a great, we can go into this a bit later, but I see you much like gender, of like your non-binary is beyond gender, is like the way that you can convey politics and queerness is very non-binary in its ability to sort of dance between left and right. But I was like, when I was like, okay, cool, we're going to get Courtney on here, am I going to like tarnish the brand by... But tarnish is like sweet, innocent Courtney's brand. And I like, so I have like briefly seen you out once before. I was DJing at Barber, and I was like, oh, isn't that Courtney? Oh, she comes to Barber, does she? Okay.
What's Courtney Act doing on the balcony with those men?
But then I powered through your book in the last week.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Nothing
She's
to be tarnished.
Quite slutty in her way. Very deep, but somehow, again, controversial maybe, it's like you're telling these very hedonistic, slutty stories, but somehow I'm hearing it, I audiobooked it as like a drag story time, It's like...
Well, we're not telling those stories at drag story time, just to be very clear.
To be very clear,
but there's definitely
for me, of age.
Yeah.
But yeah, it felt like somehow I'm not like getting gritty, like it's gritty stories, like blowing go-go boys in backstage.
Yeah.
Straight boys been like, do you need any help before you go out? But it's like somehow it's like, oh, she's so innocent and kind and lovely. And it's like, but the words are very slutty and debaucherous.
It's funny because Matthew Anderson, who was RuPaul's hair and makeup artist for 30 years, he sort of created the visual look of RuPaul and did like Janet Jackson and Christina Aguilera, like painted the faces of these iconic women during those iconic times. He's an Aussie, and we became good friends. And I remember him saying once, because he was also a producer on Drag Race, and what was the words that he said? I think it was something about that that I don't come to drag, and I guess sort of life with any spite in it, or there's no... He sort of commented that like often people will have a negative motivation or an axe to grind or something like that, and he was like, you're just like... And I it's interesting, I think my loving and supportive parents as a great foundation, and then sort of a lot of the books that I read, a lot of the queer people that were around me growing up who role modeled what healthy relationships to, I think, everything from like politics to sex to drugs to like anything that's taboo, and anything like what don't you talk about, like religion,
money,
politics,
sex.
money, sex,
Yeah.
all of those things. I feel like fortunate, and I think it's probably a part of my privilege in that having parents and having good role models and all of those sorts of things. But like, I guess I just don't think there's anything shameful about those things, or about sex, or about anything that I've done. I was talking to a friend recently who was in a very religious sort of evangelical space until like 30s. And he was saying, although he sort of had feelings, he never took action that was out of alignment with his morality. And so I was like, do you have like a shameful hangover from like this past? And he was like, no, interestingly. And I think I did live with a lot of shame of sort of growing up queer in a heteronormative world, but I never did anything that was out of alignment with my morality. Maybe I pushed the boundaries, but I was never doing something that I was like, I shouldn't be doing this. It was always approached with in awareness, like even in like a sex and drugs kind of way. I'm like, I don't think there's anything wrong with anything. I mean, as far as like my own experience and other consenting adults are concerned. And so it's sort of all about exploring like what my boundaries are and seeing what they are for me personally, as opposed to like maybe what society has told me to do. And I think because of that, even like sucking off a go-go dancer in a dressing room in a gay bar in West Hollywood feels like it's not, I don't know, it was fun. There's nothing shameful or like anything to be apologized about that. I do think that people will often sort of hide parts of themselves, particularly like public people. I mean, look, I'm a drag queen. The bar is very low. Yeah. So I think people are constantly like that, like impressed that you're just not like, we have like it's funny because there's negative ideas about who drag queens are, but all of my favorite drag queens are like really amazing, dynamic, smart, fascinating people. And I think there's something, liberating about breaking down those restrictions about sex, gender, drugs, and talking about them in the open and allowing people to see what fits them.
It's such a difference. Like, and I'm curious about if you've had any kickback in this. I talked to Brendan McLean about this and like his sort of guidance through Marsha Hines. But like,
I've also had guidance through Marsha Hines, actually.
Oh, beautiful.
She gave me a book after Idol. I was searching for answers, and Madonna said that she like studied the Kabbalah. So I went to the Darlinghurst bookshop and bought a book about the Kabbalah. And Marsha was like, girlfriend, I don't know if this book is what you're looking for necessarily. And she bought like a book from home for me to read, which was helppful at the time. That was very sweet. Sorry.
Thank you, Marsha.
Yeah, thank you, Marsha.
Thank you, Marsha. Is like, being in the forefront of the media and having a book like this. I imagine more than just queer people and gay people read this book, and if we look at the landscape of Australian people in the media, I don't imagine Hamish and Andy have stories about fucking chicks backstage.
I mean, they have stories.
They have stories, but it's not going to be in their book.
No.
Or like, Casey Donovan or whoever.
Actually, I think Casey Donovan's did make it in her book. Oh? She had like a story about, there was like her whole catfish thing and sex with this girl, and I didn't read it, but I remember her telling me.
Okay.
Anyway, continue.
Yeah, just like, I wonder if you've either had physical, tangible experiences of kickback around that, and or if there was anything afterwards that coming out, if you had thoughts. Is anyone judging me in any way for being outwardly sexually liberated, like, and shamelessly writing the book, or maybe not, having moments of like, am I allowed to say this? But yeah, was there any like either internal or external kickback that you had around being so open?
Well, the fun thing about writing a book is in a world where like you write something and it's like digitally, globally available, whether it's 10 people or millions of people. When you're writing a book, my publisher said, and it was during COVID, which is a highly recommended COVID activity, she said to me, the only people who are going to read this between now and like the end of the second draft are you and me. So like, don't think about the audience at the end reading the book. Think about it as write everything. And then at the end of the first draft, once you've got everything down, because like this story might lead to that story and this first story might not make it in, but it might lead to that second story. So write with the door closed, I think is the saying. Write with the door closed, edit with the door open, which is like close the door and just write, and then open the door and think about like who might read it. But first things first is to not think about anybody else who's reading it. Which like I got to the end of the second draft, which is when you start to show like the editor or other people. And my editor was like a lovely woman who I imagine that she like lived in the North Shore, like had like a heteronormative life. I don't necessarily know this. These are just things
This is the imagination.
Yeah, like
the fantasy you're telling yourself.
She edited Julia Gillard's book.
Okay.
And then she's
I'm sure
like,
Julia Gillard had many stories similar.
I'm sure she did. They might have been edited out. And then I was like, I started to get a little like, oh gosh, this woman's reading like a story about like rimming. And then I sort of had to like let go of, again, my projection of what this person may or may not have heard or done. And also you remember, like, most people have had sex.
Yes. Most.
So you're not telling anyone anything they don't know. It's just that most people don't talk about it. And I haven't had any kickback. I think the good thing about a book is you're getting people who are interested in hearing more about you, so they're kind of already aware on some level. And the book starts somewhere and it, you know, goes on a journey of 80,000 words that people, I think by the time they get to the stories in, you know, the Gilligan's Hotel on Oxford Street, you've already given them like a solid base of who you are and an understanding, so it feels contextual. I guess the thing about that is taking those, like, especially in this world, those sound bites out of context.
Yeah, especially with an audiobook as well now is,
Yeah. The thing is, on like Twitter, back when that was a thing, I remember like conservatives going through like old YouTube videos and finding like clips to be outraged on, like a video that I did talking about consent, or a video I did talking about gender, and being like, look at this. She says that we should be educating small children about sex. And it was some statement about like how age appropriate sex education. It was like nothing radical or wild. And I'm like, guys, you're working too hard going through like my YouTube.
That's a lot of work.
I've put it all in a book. Like, just read the book.
Forward him a copy. Here's a link if you need more details.
Here's an audio book. If you don't know how to read, then you can listen to it. But like, there's much more actually damning information inside this book that I think would be much more useful to your takedown of me.
Oh, yeah. Conservatives, stay tuned. I'm going to get more juicy details for you to use in later campaigns.
I want to see those book sales rising because it becomes a best-selling amongst conservatives. But the thing is, I think if you actually read the book, if a conservative person read the book, I guess I have this hope that like they would read it and it would humanize me and they would understand me and they'd be like, oh, look at Courtney sucking off a go-go dancer in a dressing room. Isn't that sweet?
Well, that was a word you used earlier of privilege, and I know that can be a dirty word, but it's also such an incredible word when you use it correctly, and I think that's something you do so beautifully when I listen to the book or listen to podcasts or different like political statements and aligning with certain foundations that speak out against or up for certain things that are needed, is like you do find nuance. Nuance is something very beautiful within you, I perceive. And you know, even in the book you talk about, I don't know the politician's name is, but being in the Big Brother house with this
Anne Widdecombe,
and like that moment of her being like, hey, thanks for explaining it to me in that way. Most people would have thrown their hands in the air, called me a whatever, and walked away. And like she, you know, it might have just been a drop in the ocean, but it was better than just ignoring her altogether. I don't know where that ripples out to, but just that alone on TV or in a book, people to go, oh, you don't have to blast your way through, because sometimes that doesn't work.
Yeah, I think often about, do I want to be right or do I want to be effective? And particularly now when politics is so polarized, I don't know, there seems to be on both sides these talking points that are unrelenting. And I definitely understand that, like, there's that thing of like, we don't have to agree to be friends, but when your beliefs infringe on my human rights, that's something that I can't accept, which I agree with. But I also have to think, how can I probably use my privilege, because I'm not, if someone, like if Anne Widdecombe says something to me that I perceive to be homophobic, it doesn't affect me because I'm not, I know who I am and I feel solid and comfortable in my identity, my gender, my sexuality, and I know that there's nothing wrong with any of those things. So by her saying that there is something wrong with those things, it doesn't, I'm like, oh, well, you're
that's
obviously
you,
the one who's
that's
incorrect. Yeah, you have a misunderstanding because I have the lived experience and I know there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
So having that understanding, which I think comes with age, dare I say, where I'm able to look back now and have comfort in confronting those situations. And I think, okay, if I can feel comfortable in an environment where others would feel hostile, how can I use that to be effective in communicating ideas that will help to incrementally shift people's perceptions about me and my community and other communities as well, which I think is another important thing, like allyship. Like we could have had all the Mardi Gras parades we wanted, and I'm obviously very grateful to the activists and the people who fought and were jailed and who came before us, who, you know, were able to sit here now on a podcast talking about queer stuff. But also the allies are the allies that those queer people sort of brought on board, or the people who were willing to be brought on board, who then sort of expanded into the mainstream, into everyday life, and the fact that queer people are much more visible and much more accepted than they were 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, is important. And so I think about sort of the intersections of our community. I think about the fun thing about being queer is that, like, everyone is queer. Everybody's gay. Is that there are queer people in every single faction of society. Like, there's queer religious people, like there's queer Muslims, there's queer Catholics, there's queer people of all colors, of all body shapes, of all abilities. And so I think because of that, there's like an easy way to tap into and connect with other community groups who may not necessarily look like you, sound like you, but there is like this fiber of queerness that links us all together. And I kind of like that. But I think that so often queer people can experience shame about their identities. Yeah. And Brene Brown has a quote about...
give me some Brene Brown.
Give me some Brene Brown.
Give me some Brene Brown.
I feel a little like a Texan
She's
woman
giving
today.
Brene Brown.
She's giving Brene Brown. What does she say? Empathy cannot exist where shame does. So I think perhaps one of the greatest and almost important exercises for queer people is to understand, inspect, interrogate, unpack their own shame about their own identities. And that's something that's not who they are, but it's been given to us by the world around us. But I feel like one of the most powerful things a queer person can do is to, unpack that and live authentically and sort of in the light and without shame in their queerness, because then when you can get rid of that shame, then you can find empathy for, you know, how your identity intersects with the rest of the world and help make the world a better place.
World peace.
Yeah. So I do know that this is a podcast set in a sauna, and I've just rabbited on about, you know, politics and togetherness. So should we bring it back to sex?
Yes.
I actually want to ask you a question, because you were, I think, just at Whole Festival.
I was.
In Berlin in Germany.
Yes.
I haven't been, but last summer I was in Berlin. I was performing at Berlin Pride. And then I was following the journeys of people going to Whole Festival, and I was like, oh, that looks so fun. I really wanted to go this year, but it was the same weekend as Amsterdam Pride where I was performing. Tell me about, and is it the amazing queer utopia that I imagine it to be?
It truly is. So, like, the United Queer Festival. It's so funny. Like, most guests have asked me about Whole, but I'll tell different stories every time. United Queer Festival. So it is, you know, originated out of 3 well-known Berlin parties putting on a festival. Then every year they're sort of like bringing different nightclubs and queer collectives from Amsterdam, London, like Johannesburg, Australia. Well, I got to work there this year, and I often say it's stupid. Like, it's just stupid. It really is like the cutting edge of what queerness can be, in a manner of like, I'm big on sex not being hidden, drugs not being hidden, because of in the shadows is where we overdose or sexual assault happens or whatever. So it's like, you know, here in Australia, it's just undeniable. Everyone watching, you know, 99% of you have done drugs, and we go into the toilets, or beforehand we eat all of them because we don't want to get busted, or we snort too much because like, well, when are we going to come back to the toilet and do this again? So it goes into places where we become unconscious on drugs or unconscious in our sex. And at Hull, it's all in plain sight. The only thing that they're a bit like wary about is G, or not wary, they just know G. And even I'm a bit like, oh, I hate that it's in the shadows. But they still give out like little things to measuring doodahs, and just like diverse stages, you know, the hardest of hard, pots and pans, techno, to like disco, dancing, beach stage.
Was there a vocal? Did you hear any vocals at a whole festival?
Yeah, like, you know, I think last year when I was there, like Cake's a Killer performed there's a performance stage. So like that's where people are singing and dancing and cabaret and whatnot. At the techno stage, they're here and there, or maybe once a night, one DJ will play something a bit campy to like, it's like the coffee beans of re-sniffing and cleaning the palate. So yeah, there'll be a vocal, you know, and seeing all the gender diversity, bodies, ethnicities, like from all across the world. This year was 9,000 people, and I think like each year they've sort of jumped up by 1,000. And yes, especially this year was leaning a bit more, growing in the cis white gay man spectrum, and like, you know, this year there was 6 dark rooms, and they are all different themes. So he's like
themed. I remember last year reading the Cuddle Fuck Shack.
Yeah.
And I was like,
that was my favorite.
That sounds like that's how I want to describe my sexuality. Cuddle Fuck Shack.
Great. And there was a flinter space, which was so important. Like when I run parties here, we have a flinter room, which is female, lesbian, intersex, trans, and agendered plus. And to have like, there's like a ambient stage where there's like meditation and yoga and contact dance and poetry and storytelling. Like, there's everything you'd want and need. And, you know, though if you go into their like app forum, you'd think it's the worst party ever because people are just complaining. You know, I say that
people love complaining.
Us queers are very Karen adjacent at times. But it's like something that I highly, highly recommend for people to go, oh, this is what's possible. And also it does come with a catch-22 of coming back to Sydney, Gadigal land, and being like, our parties are pathetic.
Well, I guess that's the thing, right, is that you, like, I mean, I guess the closest thing I've been to is Burning Man, where I went for 5 years and felt that liberation of freedom, where humans acted how you hope like the best of humanity can act. And it sort of reminds you like, oh wow, we do have it in us.
Yeah,
we do have it in us to connect and to be compassionate and loving and sexual and consenting, and then you kind of get to bring that back to Sydney and add a little sparkle and change it in your own way. Let's say there's something.
While you think of it, I want to get a little spicier.
Okay.
It's like just the openness, right? Is two things that I can't remember in what order. There's like around the main stage is an amazing like amphitheater grandstand looking thing. It's in this like iron cove, old like
like a
cranes,
shipping yard,
boats, things. I don't know, but me and my partner.
You want a tetanus shot before you go there, don't you?
Tetanus shot, monkeypox, whatever you can get, jab it in your. Is we just had like sex in the grandstand in the nice glowing sun. There's like thousands of people dancing in front of us, and then so my partner and one of my good friends / co-worker had never shelved a pill before. And we were making jokes that we're going to shelf a pill. They had also never given or received a rim job or like done any anal play. So we, in the grandstand, where everyone can see us, me, my partner, and my friend got another friend. I proposed to them, put a condom over their finger, and they went through and boop, up my butthole, boop, up his butthole, boop, up their butt. And it's like, we just like had sex and did drugs in front of everyone, and it was so normal. There was no shame. Some friends walked past and they're like, ha ha ha, you guys are hilarious. But it was like, anyways, do you want to go for a dance somewhere? It wasn't like this big, I can't believe you did that. Oh my God, how tough. Did security see you? Did police see you? Are we going to get locked up? It's just like, oh cool, that was a really normal, little art installation that happened over here.
And when you remove the shame from things, like if you would describe this to like a conservative person, they might be like repulsed or think it's the most hedonistic sort of sacrilegious, whatever thing that they've ever heard of. But when you're actually there experiencing it, you're like, this is so fun.
This is joy.
And joy.
This is camp.
And there's that thing of like separating conditioning from the actual lived experience. Like rather than having this devotional understanding of what sex should feel like or should be limited to, it's just like, oh, actually, when you like have sex in public and there's other people around and the sun is shining, like there's actually something beautiful about that. It's not shameful or gross, or...
and like everyone's in consent to it. That's a big thing as well. There's like no, like it wasn't like we'll just.
And I would imagine that like you don't have to worry. Do people have phones? Are they like cameras and photos as possible?
At this, yes, there's phones and cameras, right? But I'm pretty
fine with that.
Do what you want.
I mean, I guess that's the thing, like with someone like Berghain in Berlin.
There's no, and most Berlin clubs stickers over the phone.
Yeah, you put a sticker over the phone, and that does give you a sense of freedom, and also the way that it's enforced.
If you get busted with
you've thrown out,
you're out. You're out. You're banned. 3 months, whatever.
And thankfully, like people would rather respect the rules, and also like they know when they're in there that they'd rather be in there than excluded from there, so they tend to like understand and agree with the rules.
I have such a deep affinity and admiration for Berlin culture, where like the deepest thing of inclusivity they can do is be extremely exclusive, like to shut people out. So what happens in there's no judgment, and there's no way of capturing it. There's no, like, I've implemented it with my parties. I've seen Chinese laundry here have a no phone policy now that they've reopened, and I just think that's so revolutionary, and also like just makes common sense. Like we're more present with each other. We're not trying to show anyone else what's going on, and it brings an allure to like, how infamous is Berghain, and especially with that hard door pull. Like, what's it like in there? Oh my God, how will I get in? Like I just so deeply want it. I think that's similar to saunas, because you can't have a phone in sauna spaces. Is like,
we also have a locker, which is so handy.
Yeah.
So you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You can like check your messages, not feel totally disconnected. Because I think for a lot of people, like, where would you put? I mean, you have your phone with you at Berghain, you just have a sticker on it, but it's enforcing it. Like, I think if you did that in Sydney, I don't know, I guess you would have to like have a party that was very authoritarian about phones and kicking people out and stuff like that. But like here, you have your phone in your locker, and then you can go away, have fun, feel the freedom of not being digitally recorded.
Yeah, forgetting what's going on, and then be like, oh, I want to check on what Susie's doing.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up I was coming of age in the year 2000 in Sydney, when cameras didn't exist. And actually, like, you'd be like with your friends, and like the scene photographer would come along, who you also knew anyway. Yeah. And he'd be like, Maz, can you take a photo of us? And you'd all be like together, and then you'd like flip through the paper to see if you made it.
Yeah. What was like monkey and when
but I always had I know like Gen Z kids are like carrying Sony CyberShot, like 1 megapixel Sony CyberShot cameras now, like ironically, or I don't know. But I was the person who had the Sony Cybershot back in the year 2000. And I still have
You're an
all
OG.
the photos.
Oh, wow.
And a hard drive. Like somehow over the years, like I may have lost a few, but I had like, I always like managed to get the photos onto a hard drive and then that hard drive somewhere else. I recently thought that I had lost them all after finally getting them all in one place. But then I found, where did I find them? I found all of these hard drives. I was like, oh, thank God. And so, yeah, I've got like photos like in folders from like 2000 and 2001, 2002, 2003. And I look through it and I'm like, wow. The things that we did on photo, on film, we would never do now. Because back then, there was nowhere for those photos to go. There was no social media.
And there was no just quickly deleting it off and picking the best one. It was like, ching, that's it.
And then there was also like, there was no, people like would take photos, especially on like a digital camera, they would take photos, but then like no one ever printed them out. So it wasn't even like there was a physical copy.
No.
And yeah, I think like the idea of like, oh, this can go on Facebook. And then I remember that first friend who like had that cooked photo of them put on Facebook and then their boss at work saw it. And, that sort of repercussion.
Well, that happened. So here, when I do parties, we set up like a photo booth installation room so people can get photos of their outfits or with their friends and whatnot. Someone recently, and you know, they've got a consent to it going on our website and whatnot. Someone emailed me from 2 parties ago and said, hey, I'm thinking I'm going to be losing my job because they found a picture of me on your website because they're openly sexual. How? I was like, current activate, you know? How dare they? Yeah. I was like, okay, yeah, I can take that down. So sorry, that's fucking happening.
It's so weird, like... when work, and I mean, I guess I've always been lucky that I've worked in
same
queer bars, or I mean, I guess now I do work for TV networks and, you know, public broadcasters, and I do have to, I want to be like uncancelable for the right reasons. I want to be above the law.
Yeah.
No, I just want to like create a career that has its own audience, that is like understanding of everything enough that like I'm not dependent on having to like do the right thing to like appease a mainstream kind of audience. Because sometimes I do have that thing where I'm like, oh, I guess that like this conversation is like not going to be broadcast on the ABC. So it's like it's a public forum, but it is a closed circuit in some respects.
People are hitting our certain market in our certain niche. Yeah, that's something like I was wondering, like I've picked up gigs with MTV and Adidas before, and I'm like, does this jeopardize or does this help? You know, like I don't know where society is anymore. If I want to get something with Triple J or ABC or whoever, you know, in the future, does having this like long history of me sharing stories with other people about my sex life and queerness and drugs, and does that jeopardize things? Or are we in an age where it's like, cool, you know, there's things like Heartbreak High in Australia and sex education, where all these themes, though they're fictional, but they're representations of real life. Are we modern enough now where it's like we can talk about these things and still grow our careers without there being a ceiling because I'm a drag queen, because I'm a queer activist, because I'm a sex worker or whatever, you know? I think
the people who will get it will get it. The people who won't get it won't get it. And then there'll be a whole bunch of people in the middle who, if they come across it, might be like, oh, that was too much for me. Or, oh, that's really interesting, and lean in further. And I think that sometimes you have to accept when you're sort of on the pioneering side of society that it will limit some of your opportunities, especially like with the old guard. But then in other ways, like, I mean, I think Abby Chatfield's an interesting person who really talks about...
My partner is obsessed with Fuckboy Island.
I haven't watched it yet, actually. I watched like an episode of like season 1 and anyway, I think Abby's really interesting in that I see, you know, the clips of her on TikTok and Instagram. I watch clips from TikTok on Instagram.
Yes.
of
like
happy,
a true
like
person in their 30s.
true person in their 40s.
In their 30s.
And I'm really intrigued, and I know that she says things that are provocative and controversial to some, but then she is ploughing on with a great career, and I think that there's something in that where there's an authenticity and you own it, and yes, people will criticize or not understand, but I think ultimately if it's authentic, then here we go. It's meant to be talking about sex.
Look, it's the chemistry. We can't help it. All right, let's do some hard and fast questions around sex. Favorite sauna, dark room, sex space that you've been around the world on tours?
Favorite? I mean, probably like at Burning Man, even though it's like dirty, people maybe aren't bathing quite as frequently as one would ordinarily appreciate, but there is like a liberation. Or like Fire Island. There's Fire Island is like off the coast of New York. It's a predominantly queer island. There's like a gay male side and more of like a lesbian side, lesbian queer side, and then like in the middle is like the meat rack, which is like late at night it kind of goes. But actually all of these houses, there's no cars, it's all linked by little boardwalks, and people stay. There's no shops, there's no there's like one bar and one nightclub, but people have like these homes. And I remember like I went to the underwear party at the Ice Palace in Cherry Grove. I walked in and they give you like a black garbage bag to put your clothes in. And so I was there taking my clothes off. And this guy standing next to me was like, "Oh, I heard they have a dark room." And I was like, "Oh, should we go and have a look?" And then we did. And then we had a wonderful night of chemistry and sex and passion in the dark room. Then we went down to the beach, which, you've got to sometimes you need a hand for support, but you've got to know which is your sand hand and which is your non-sand hand.
Okay, yeah, we don't want to.
You don't want a gritty. No.
We don't want to circumcise someone with sandpaper hands.
And then sort of like a fleeting Fire Island romance. And then I had such a lovely night. And then I remember walking back, and just to sort of get back to the Pines, there was like a house, maybe a friend had messaged, and I walked in and it was like a scene from a movie of just like a giant pool and like gardens and just like men fucking everywhere.
Yes.
And actually I'd had such a lovely
sexcapade.
Sweet.
A romantic evening.
How does Courtney Act make getting fucked in a dark room sound like sweet and innocent? But I was like, wow, this looks like a fantasy. I thought, actually, I'm just going to go home to bed. I went home to bed and then saw my Fire Island date the next day.
Legs up in the air, wrote in a dear journal, dear diary. I fell in love.
Fucked in a dark room and
affirmed my, pillows and snuggle tent fantasies.
Yeah, cuddle, fuck, shack fantasy. But yeah, I guess I think with sex, I've always sought connection, even if it is like one night stand momentary, or anonymous or one night or wherever it is. I think when I was younger, I had sex for validation, where I didn't know what I was doing. I was just I knew that there was an insecurity in me and someone else's attraction to me, someone else wanting to have sex with me was validating of the insecurity that I felt, where this person feels I'm worthy of having sex with, therefore there must be something about me that is okay, in a place where I couldn't feel that in myself. I think as you get older and as you get more comfortable, also that sex never made me feel good. Yeah. It always left me feeling a bit empty. And even when it was sex with someone hot, or sex with, like there was times in between the sort of validating sex that some of it felt good. And the thing that differentiated the non-connective sex was like when you connected with someone and you kind of had that little like little spark.
Yeah.
And there was something more than just, it wasn't like just my genitals feeling good. It was like
it's not this area that's getting satisfied only. It's
it was like
an embodied
feeling.
experience.
And then, I think as I got older and more comfortable with myself, I realized that like I only wanted to have sex when I felt that spark or that frisson. And again, that doesn't mean that it has to be like sweet and cuddly. Like there's still certainly been occasions where it's like, and like more on the anonymous side, but you still kind of just like, I don't know what it is. There's just something, maybe it's something.
It was like you're emotionally, like you're saying before, you needed validation. So it's like, okay, I'm good with me. I can bring my full self into this rather than somehow them filling myself back up with myself because
spiritually and physically.
It is like, and then, the contrary happens usually is like you feel quite empty. It's like, no, you didn't fill me out with myself. You took the last of me through that exchange.
And like, maybe that's a weird like metaphor that we think there's an emptiness that needs filling. Will this physical object do it?
Yeah.
And like, you're like, no, it's not that your whole physically needs to be filled. It's that your soul spiritually does. And I mean spiritual in the least spiritual way possible. More just like emotional. Yeah. And I think it's an alignment, an embodiment, an alignment of like your thinking and your body and your sexuality. Because I think that like sex, whilst there's like an intellectual or a thinking stimulation side to sex, I actually think like sex is a physical act that I think some people, or when I do definitely remember times like having sex, and rather than like being present in the sex that I was having, like thinking about like someone or something I thought was hot. I don't really watch porn, but it's almost like you were like watching porn in your head while like living porn in reality. Yeah. And now I'm like, this makes no sense. Like you're actually like having sex right now. You should
you're dreaming about other sex.
Other sex.
Yeah. I think we all do that to an extent. It's hard because of, I guess, I've worked in the sex therapy space and worked with a lot of sex therapists. Is like we eventually hardwire like the NLP, the neurolinguistics of your brain get hardwired to what is most pleasurable to you. And it's like, it's this, and it's like whatever your dream scenario is. So it's like, it's actually hard if you're disconnected from your body to get off in sex, where it's like, no, this isn't exactly what I've hardwired as the thing that makes me come.
Well, that's why I guess that like embodiment of sex, I think like I only recently heard the term embodiment, but I've done a lot of Vipassana meditation where you're like 10-day silent meditation retreats where you're meditating for like 11 hours a day for an hour at a time. But the whole point of it is like focusing on the sensations of your body and accepting those sensations as they are, not as you want them to be. And so in that idea of focusing on the sensations of your body, that's something that I try and bring to sex, where I'm like, to be present in sex is like, well, what does this feel like? What does this hand feel like? What does that body feel like? What does my body feel like? What details can I feel like? Do I feel a heartbeat? Do I feel body heat? Focusing on like some of those more rudimentary, like what does their body feel like? Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it hairy? Is it smooth? And bringing it to that sort of physical place, I think is a really helpful way of becoming more present and enjoying sex more. Because I think if you're having sex with someone and you're in your mind somewhere else, I think you're shortchanging your current experience.
Yeah, and the person.
Yeah.
And the person.
And if being present isn't something that you want to do, then maybe it's not sex you should be having.
In more like disembodied times of my life, I would do that, go have sex with someone, fantasize about something else, come home and jerk off to the experience I just had. How fucked up is that? How fucked up is that?
I get it. But like when you think about it, you would have just been better off being present with the sex that you were having.
Yeah.
But I think that is a thing that, look, I don't know who. I certainly know like other gay men that I talk to do that. And I sometimes I like fantasize like that all queer people are like evolved and enlightened. And then I'm like, no, we're all just, on our own journey.
Yes.
When it comes to sex, the idea of like feeling aligned with your thinking and your body, but when you're having sex, like being present, because it's also that thing like be present. A lot of people are like, well, I'm here, but what does that mean? And I think it's those little things of like focusing on the sensations of your body, on the other person's body, and what they make you feel rather than what they make you think. Trying to observe like, does this make me horny? Does this make me like...
Am I shut down somewhere?
Yeah, am I shut down somewhere? That's another
sometimes
important
that's why we're trying to override. Am I
Yeah.
shut down? Oh, am I? That's like, all sex therapists say is like, for people that have either that come to early ejaculation or people that can't get it up is like, are you actually present in the moment? Are you feeling the sensations of the person touching you or you touching them? Or are you 10 steps ahead, you know? Yeah, embodiment, presence. Like it is a meditation. It is like, the best thing about it is like the greatest sex. And I believe when we're feeling empty or not fully within ourselves, part of it is because sex can just blow you open and it can get you out of your head. And that's why it's so like, it's rhythmic, it's trance, you know, and whatever pace you're doing is like, but yeah, feeling that. It's like, it's so much better to have a full body orgasm than just this one area, and that's usually what makes me feel empty.
And you know what can help? Poppers. I've got this theory, again, a personal theory, not advocating for other people, but just talking about my own experience. Like poppers, which amyl nitrate, it's like a vasodilator. It opens up your blood vessels. It relaxes your smooth
recently
muscle.
made quite popular from Troye Sivan's Rush.
Yes, which he allegedly huffed to take the cover photo. That flushed look in his face.
Oh, yeah, I guess he's very blushed.
Is because he just had a hit of poppers and then took the photo. That's a true story. That's not.
Oh, okay. You heard it here first.
Well, no, I read it on the internet, but like from a Troye interview.
Yeah.
I've got this theory that like poppers are like they open up all of the blood vessels and relax all the smooth muscle in your body at once, which is kind of like, it's not normal. It's like a shocking thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like when you do it, your thinking mind is almost like, sorry, we don't, your body as a whole system is like, sorry, thinking mind, we don't have time for you right now.
Bye, girl.
We have an emergency going on. We don't know what the fuck's happening, but every blood vessel in our entire body has just opened. Like, are we about to bleed out? Like, what's happening? Like, it needs to go to feeling present. And you're like overwhelmed with sensation. And so you're forced into this like violent meditation of presence. And so like people talk about like poppers being something that can help a bottom relax or open up more. But I feel like it can just help everyone be extremely present. In that like you become hyper aware of like touch and sensation, sometimes in an overwhelming way. And obviously not advocating for there's times and places, and it can...
Everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation.
Including moderation.
Exactly. But yeah, that's my personal theory on poppers, that they're like... I remember
a descendant of Jesus.
I remember
helps you reach Christ consciousness.
Well, I remember hearing Eckhart Tolle talk about someone asked him about like, oh, what you're describing sounds like acid. And he was like, yes, well, I did acid once to see if it was similar. And it was similar, but it was like a violent version of like presence and like that, like you were forced
It's
into
overwhelmingly present.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I was thinking like poppers and sex are kind of like that. Then as some people can become dependent on that,
Yes.
and that's not a positive thing. But yeah, I feel the rush, addicted to your touch. Is that the words? I feel
It is. Me in the first episode, Hollywood Star and I did either or and a sniff. And then Hollywood asked me, Troye Sivan or Lil Nas X? And then, sniff RuPaul or Michelle Visage, like, who would you want to have sex with? So it was like a great, like, getting out of the way of any stories that were all like blockers, industry, politics, and just like going straight for the kill of who we'd bang.
There you go.
I think it's a great note to end on.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us. I would love to just give you an opportunity to share about anything you have coming up, anything people should check out. Definitely the book, Courtney Act.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the conservatives watching.
Yes.
Is there anything people should be looking out for you at the moment? I know you're opening your YouTube channel.
I'm in the YouTube era.
Yes.
Look, it's only week 2 and it nearly didn't even make it to week 2. I keep, like, every year I'm like, all right, I'm going to get back into YouTubing. When I lived in LA, I was like on my YouTube train and then kind of got busy. And so I'm currently on week 2, depending on when this comes out. Mm-hmm. I may be up to week 5 or 6.
Or I might still be on week 2.
I might still be on week 2. No, I think just generally like, I'm just like I'm
doing Brisbane Pride.
I'm doing the Melt Festival, which is a queer arts festival, and they're having a river pride parade.
You went and practiced in Amsterdam this year.
I went and practiced in Amsterdam. Except the fun thing is that in Brisbane, there's no bridges every like 20 meters that you have to duck to not get decapitated.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Brisbane Pride Parade is going to be really fun. I'm looking forward to that. And there's a huge arts festival, queer open access arts festival. So there's heaps of really good stuff. So I'm looking forward to going up there and seeing all of that. What else is on? Yeah, I think just like I'm on social media, just posting about stuff.
Looks, politics, sex, music.
All of it.
Yeah,
trying to be nuanced.
You do it well.
Thank you.
We did it well.
Thank
you, Courtney Act.
Thanks for having me. Someone said that that this podcast was going to be like playing at Sydney Sauna, and I was like, that feels weird to be like on a screen at Sydney Sauna while people are having sex. And it took me back to a time. It was 2014. Drag Race was airing on TV at the time, and I was at the sexual health clinic in West Hollywood getting like a sexual health checkup, and I was sitting there in the waiting room, and I look up and like Drag Race is playing, and like everybody's like sitting there watching, and like yes, hello, it's me. So I'm picturing like some sort of adjacent experience where I'm just in the hot tub living my best life, and then we can up on the screen. Yeah, can I request that if I'm ever in the venue?
Yeah. Maybe we can do the like how they do at Roscoe's like screening episode, and we'll hear you on a panel reviewing the whole thing. No. Yeah,
this is not leading towards my goal of like non-social objectification in the Sydney gay scene by having videos on the screen at Sydney Sauna, but hopefully this podcast will help somebody, and
it will.
That'll all be worth it.
It will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mwah, mwah, mwah.